Matthew chapter 28. We'll continue our exposition in this passage. Yesterday we talked about everyone. Now I'd like to talk about everywhere. So Matthew chapter 28, I'll start reading today on verse 18. Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." So, yesterday, we learned some lessons from this passage. We talked that the success of the mission depends on Jesus. This was the first lesson. The second lesson was that before Jesus gave the apostles a mission, they themselves were his mission. So Jesus was working in them so he could work through them. And third lesson, if Jesus chose, equipped, sent, and used this group, and we saw how they were limited and not reliable, then there is hope for you and for me. And when we talk about the Great Commission, the mission to make disciples of all nations, this is a mission that all of us today should be engaging. So we saw that every disciple, number one, is called to engage in the mission of making disciples. And we also saw that there are different roles and ministries in the mission. Although we have the very same mission, there are different positions for the players in this game. And we saw in the third place that there is no hierarchy among the players. It's not the case that one ministry is more spiritual than others. No, we all have our responsibility in this process equally. And today I'd like to emphasize this expression of all nations. Because the order, the commission is go therefore and make disciples. But the text says, of all nations. What does it mean? What are the implications? I'd like to emphasize only this, of all nations. The Greek word here is ethnos, which means ethnicities. This is the same word that we use to describe ethnic. So we are talking about different nations, different groups with different languages, different cultures, different places. In the New Testament, and this is very important, this word is used 93 times in reference to Gentiles. So when you open your Bible in the New Testament, 93 times this Greek word will appear there in the original and will be translated by Gentiles. And 67 times this word appears in reference to nation or nations. This means that the Great Commission assumes that the gospel is for everyone, everywhere. And when I say everyone, I'm talking about people from every different ethnicity, nation. But let's consider that. You know that one of the exercises we need to do when we read the Bible is to read the Bible within the context. Let's understand a little bit the importance of this here. Because today, in Canada, 2024, diversity is a kind of national value. We celebrate diversity. You don't need to be a Christian to understand that this is something that we see in TV or on everybody talking about this. Schools, universities, everybody talking about diversity. We need to celebrate. Our country is diverse. Diversity is a kind of religion in our country. But it's important to understand that during these times, when Jesus was talking this about all nations to these disciples, it was not the case. That time, diversity was not something well established. They could understand very well when Jesus talked about go and make disciples. Of course, you know that Jesus was considered a kind of rabbi, and that time there were many rabbis. The culture of teaching, making disciples was impregnated in the early Jewish culture. They knew very well the importance of making a disciple. However, they were not able to understand when Jesus said, make disciples of all nations, and they were immediately thinking about the Gentiles. But how is that, Jesus? Because I am not able to even enter in the house of a Gentile. I cannot do that. They are sinners. So the gospel, this message, Jesus, is not for them. It's for us. If Jesus said, hey, go and make disciples in this nation of Israel, okay, this could be very easy for them. But Jesus includes all nations. And this is a kind of paradigm shift, even for the disciples. You remember that early in the book of Matthew, this same book, very same book, chapter 10, Jesus sent his disciples in mission. And he said, these 12 Jesus sent out, instructing them, go nowhere among the Gentiles. And the word here is ethnon. And enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And this was maybe 1 or 2 years before the Great Commission. And now Jesus is saying, go and make disciples of all nations. And the very same word is used. Before he said, hey, go nowhere among the Gentiles. And now he's saying, go and make disciples of all Gentiles. You see, there is a paradigm shift in here. Because now Jesus was able to preach to Israel, and the Jews rejected the message. And now Jesus is saying, hey, the gospel is for everyone, everywhere. You need to understand that. And I can say to you, reading the book of Acts, the first great challenge for the church in the first years, when you read the book of Acts, was to overcoming the barrier, that separate Gentiles and Jews. This was a great barrier for them. What was the first evidence of the presence of the Holy Spirit with the disciples, with the church? What was the first miracle? What was the first equipping moment for the church? You remember that? Speaking in tongues, and I would say different idioms, languages. And when you read Acts chapter 2, they're not talking about what we call today glossolalia, like talking blah, 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 cantalabasúrias, etc. No, it's not what we see in the book of Acts. What we see in the book of Acts was different idioms, languages, because the gospel was for every nation. So the obstacle to overcome was to be able to speak like I am doing today. Because English is not my first language. I needed to spend hours, I would say years, and I'm still learning. And only God knows how difficult it is for me. I need God's provision every time I am here. I remember a professor of mine, he talked about this duck theology. You know what's a duck theology? When you see a duck on the lake, it's very calm, right? But if you see under the water, very agitated movement. And this is me every time I'm here. You see, it seems I am calm, I'm in peace, but actually I'm a duck here, right? Because inside, it's not easy to speak another language. But the fact is that this was a miracle because the gospel was for every nation. In this we see diversity. Let's see Rebecca McLaughlin saying that for many, the idea that Christianity is a white Western religion intrinsically tied to cultural imperialism stands as a major ethical barrier to considering Christ. But, she says, contrary to popular conceptions, the Christian movement was multicultural and multi-ethnic from the outset. If you care about diversity, don't dismiss Christianity. It is the most diverse, multi-ethnic, and multicultural movement in all of history. Let's understand that. The gospel and Christianity is multicultural, is diverse. But we need to clarify, living in Canada in 2024, that what we understand by diversity, reading the Bible, is not the same that we hear the world today in Canada saying about diversity. There's a different concept about diversity. Biblical and missional diversity doesn't mean unconditional and unrestricted acceptance. Let's understand here diversity. Today, the Oxford Dictionary says that diversity is the practice or quality of including or involving people from a range of different social and ethnic backgrounds and of different genders, sexual orientations, etc. So when the world today talks about diversity, it's not just ethnicities like we see in the Bible. We need to understand that the gospel brings diversity, yes, which means that we should accept physical traits. Some people use the word race, although we understand that there is just one race, the human race. But okay, let's understand that we have black, white, yellow, people with different physical traits, colors, shape in the eyes, and cultures, and it's different, physical traits. We should accept that. You need to understand that you are not Michael Jackson. You cannot change your color, right? You don't change your color because you become Christian. No. We need to accept different colors, different physical traits equally. In the same way, we should accept different languages, right? We speak in English here for a pragmatic reason, so everybody can understand. But the fact that we have Christians and brothers and sisters around the world talking every different language, we should include cultural customs as well. There are different customs depending on the culture, and it's not the case that the gospel will change all customs we see in the culture. No, there is a space for that. Political preferences. So we saw yesterday that within the 12 there was someone from the extreme left and someone from the extreme right. So a person can vote in different ways. And the fact that you are a Christian doesn't mean that you need to vote for one specific party. There is a space for diversity in this. Social condition, contrary of what some people say, the fact that you become a disciple doesn't mean that you become rich, right? Maybe your social condition won't change too much. So all these things, they are part of our diversity, the gospel diversity. However, we should challenge. We should challenge because I love this quote from Tim Keller. Tim Keller says, God sees us as we are, loves us as we are, and accepts us as we are. But by His grace, He does not leave us as we are. There is change. So we should, and the gospel should challenge behavioral traits, character. Physical traits, there is a space for diversity, but we should challenge behavior traits. We should challenge religion. You cannot just say, okay, I follow Jesus, but I will be a Buddhist at the same time. No, you need to decide. Who are you following? Cultural idols. Every culture has idols, and they need to be challenged. Moral preferences, social relationships. We need to challenge them. You cannot say, okay, I'll be a Christian, a disciple, but as we have diversity, I will be a liar. This is my behavioral trait, or this is my moral preference. Or, no, the gospel will challenge. The fact that the gospel is for everyone doesn't mean that you stay the same and the gospel won't touch in your heart to change you. John Stott says, we must not elevate non-essentials, especially issues of custom and ceremony, to the level of the essential and make them tests of orthodoxy and conditions of fellowship. Nor must we marginalize fundamental theological or moral questions as if they were only cultural and of no great importance. So we need a balance here to understand that when we talk about diversity, this is a different thing that the world talks about. We were talking in our workshop here today that for Gen Zers, gender is a fluid thing. They don't understand gender like the older generations. For them, this is not a binary thing. No. However, the gospel will include Gen Zers, but will challenge them in their convictions about gender. So, on other aspects, we should be tolerant. We should be welcoming. Let's see here this image. All are welcome, as long as you voted the right way. Many churches embraced a kind of what we call today Christian nationalism. And this is very dangerous because we saw that the gospel is for all nations. Like this article, the ballot booth is not your baptism. We need to be open for different perspectives on politics. So this is diversity. We cannot embrace nationalism and the Great Commission at the same time. They are excluded. Incompatible. Yeah, that's right, Jeffrey. Thank you so much. So, let me give you an example, and then we'll go for practical implications. So we don't have time, and I don't like to give you a kind of overdose today. So, the letter of Diognetus, 2nd century. Let's see the example of these early Christians. The Christians are distinguished from other men, neither by country, nor language, nor the customs which they observe. For they neither inhabit cities or of their own, nor employ a peculiar form of speech, nor lead a life which is marked out by any singularity, but inhabiting Greek as well as barbarian cities, according as the lot of each of them has determined, and following the customs of the natives in respect to clothing, food, and the rest of their ordinary conduct, they display to us their wonderful and confessedly striking method of life. They dwell in their own countries, but simply as sojourners, as citizens. They share in all things with others, and yet endure all things as if foreigners. Every foreign land is to them as their native country, and every land of their birth is a land of strangers. So there is this, tension in the Christian life. Because the gospel, we can say that to summarize what we said until here. The gospel is both exclusive and inclusive. There is this tension in the gospel. The message is exclusive. Discipleship has a cost. You cannot say, okay, I accept Jesus, but don't ask me to change anything in my life. No, the gospel is exclusive. But at the same time, we need to understand that the gospel is inclusive. They will include people from all different nations. What are the implications for that? And then we finish with 4 implications. If we want to accomplish this mission, if we want to be all nations disciples, if we want to make disciples of all nations, we need to be aware of 4 principles here for us. Number 1, outward movement. We can say that while it's possible to go out without making disciples, it is impossible to make disciples without going out. We need to understand that the gospel is from inside out, geographically, intellectually, emotionally. The movement of the gospel is from the center to the margins, not the opposite. The movement of the gospel is not that I am here and I will accept and attract people from there to come here. The mission is not invite or come. No, the mission is go. Because there is this outward movement towards the nations. I remember this woman called Connie, when my dad was planting a church in Rio, years ago, 20 years ago, there was a church in Florida supporting him. And annually, this church used to have a kind of missionary conference. And my dad was invited to be there. Later, I was invited to be there too, and for this conference. And members of the church used to host us there. And there was a woman of this church, American woman. And, you know, she entered a course to learn Portuguese. She was able to speak in Portuguese because she was hosting Brazilian pastors. And then she said, hey, I want to host well. And because of that, I will learn Portuguese. I think this is a great example of outward movement, intellectually. She understood that she was not the center of everything. She needed to make this movement. Today in Canada, we need to do maybe the other movement. We have lots of Brazilians here, and I say, hey, please, we need to talk in English, because when we talk in English, we are loving the people in this country. So, outward movement. The second principle is exile mindset. You remember the letter of Diognetus? Every foreign land is to them as their native country, and every land of their birth is a land of strangers. We need to understand that we are exiles in this world. Let me tell you how this is important. I don't know if you ever heard about this man, Leslie Newbegin. He is considered one of the biggest and the main missiologists of our time. By the 50s, he left England to go to India as a missionary. And he spent 50 years there. 40 years. And then, after this period, he came back to England. And when he came back, it was a shock for him to find England. He said, hey, this England is not the same England that I left 40 years ago. When he left England to India, he needed to learn the language. He needed to have a kind of missional approach, understanding the culture, adapting the language, contextualization, yeah, you understood. Now I'm tired. Okay. He needed to have this missional mindset. But when he came back, he said, hey, now I feel strange. It's the same when we come back, like many years here, and we come back to our country of origin, and we think, hey, this is not my home anymore. I feel strange here. And he said, the problem is that when I left England, it was a Christian country. But now, it is not Christian anymore. Secularism invaded this country. And we cannot assume that people will understand. So he said we need to have a missionary encounter. And this is a very important expression in Leslie Newbegin. a missionary encounter with our culture. It's interesting that when we hear stories about missionaries, we respect and we love to hear, hey, yeah, I went to that place and I spent like 4 years trying to understand the language and the customs and the culture and to understand how they think so I can share the gospel properly. But today we don't do this here. And why not? Because we assume that our country, our city, understands the gospel without a huge effort in contextualization. But the fact is that based on the lesson that Leslie Newbegin learned, do not presume people in the Western have the same religious assumptions and we will understand the gospel without proper contextualization. Local missions have become transcultural missions. 4 years ago, Juliana and I, we were invited for a dinner with Juliana's boss. He's from Quebec, Canadian for like 4th generation, Christian, Catholic, regularly going to the church, Catholic church in Quebec. And then Juliana started working with this family, and the guy was here and invited us for a dinner. I came there, and nice to meet you. And he asked me, what do you do? Then I said, I am a pastor. And he said, what's that? I never heard about a pastor. Is this a profession? Is this a job? What do you do? And then I had to explain the job of a pastor. And I talked about the Bible and helping people to understand the Bible and reading and walking with people. And then the next day, and during that night, like almost 2 hours, he was making questions. The next day, this guy, Christian, Catholic from Quebec, in the morning, he asked Juliana, when I came back home, I saw in my shelf a book called the New Testament. Is this the Bible? What does it mean? This means that we cannot assume that people, Christian people around us, understand anything about the Bible. If you take maybe 100 kids, grade 5, 4, and talk to them about Jesus, and for example, you talk about Adam, there's a high chance that they never heard about Adam. So the same exercise a missionary has to do to go to India or Africa or Amazon. And the exercise of learning the culture, learning the language, we need to do today. Because we are missionaries in this transcultural place called Canada. So we need to have this exile mindset. The third principle, sacralization of the secular. And I'll be fast here. You know that we have in the Bible, in the New Testament, the word ecclesia, the word Greek, the Greek word ecclesia, which means the gathering, the church gathered. When we are together, we are ecclesia. But the church is also called diaspora. This is a Greek word that describes the church scattered in the world. So the church is the church when the church is gathered and when the church is scattered. When the church is together, we used to recognize that and say, okay, we are the church. We are in the church, we say. But can we say the same in the diaspora? In the secular world? The fact is that we need to see ministry and our jobs as mission. Interesting that usually ministry is only what happens in the temple. So what we do here, ministry. What we do there, oh no, there is work. There is job. And then, at the same time, we understand that missions is only what happened abroad. They are missionaries there. No, here, max, we evangelize. No, we need to have a holistic understanding of our world. What we do in the diaspora is as holy as what we do in the ecclesia. Monday to Friday is so holy, is as holy as Sunday. Because our lives, they are a living sacrifice. This is what the Apostle Paul says, Romans chapter 12. Present your bodies as a living sacrifice. So we need to sacralize the secular. So the people will see that wherever we go, we are in mission. I think that it was J.I. Packer that said that the best missionary, the best strategy, the best definition for evangelism is a Christian being a Christian every time. This is the best strategy. Be a Christian where you are. And the fourth and last principle, so we finish here, hospitality. Henry Nouwen says that hospitality is not to change people, but to offer them space where change can take place. And my question is, are we able to welcome people, even if they are not transformed or changed as we expected? The question is, what if God had the same level of patience with you and me that we have toward others? Can you imagine that? If God was so patient with you, the same way that you were patient with others, exercising hospitality is offering a space that people can come and say, hey, I have a safe space here to change, and God will change, not us. So in times of strong polarization, what does it mean? Exercising hospitality. In today's world of division, strife, and hatred, Jesus' command and commission to make disciples from people of all ethnic groups is more important than ever. And I finish asking, in a church with people from at least 15 different countries, and these flags here, they are not like aleatory or by chance. I don't know if this is a word. Random, sorry, aleatory. I'm not good today. Random. They represent all nations we have in our church today. We have people in our church from each one of these places. In a church with people from at least 15 different countries, what have you done to effectively show Christian hospitality toward others? Some questions for us. Who are our friends? Who have you invited to come to your home for a lunch? Is there space in your life for people with different cultural backgrounds, languages, and political ideologies? We should think about that. Or are we doing missions only in our peers that speak the same language, with the same culture. They are our brothers. We need to be aware about that. Doing missions or making disciples of all nations starts here. Starts here in this church. We have a great opportunity. I was a pastor in Brazil for 10 years in planting this church. And you can ask me about how many different nationalities I had there. I can answer you. In 10 years in Brazil, I had, you know, how many? One. Brazil. I never thought about this. And making disciples of all nations starts in here. We should invest and take this opportunity. You should call Azim to go to your house. By the way, Akila she knows how to make a beautiful food dish, right? And you should invite people from different countries to go to your place. Janet from Jamaica. I know that she wants to talk a lot about using boat. Yeah, it's there. And we have a beautiful meal in this Tim and Marquesa place from Africa. And from Ukraine, the same. So we have the privilege to exercise this here in the church. But if we keep going and calling and inviting people only from our comfort zone, we'll miss this opportunity. So let me finish with Revelation chapter 7, verse 9. Are we having a song after? No? You can come, please. Revelation chapter 7, verse 9. This is a eschatological image. Can we read this together here? Okay, let's read together. After this, I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. This means that the mission will be fulfilled. The mission will be accomplished. With you or without you, the mission will be accomplished. And the mission, more than a responsibility, it's a privilege we have to be part of this. And when I read this, I understand that in heaven, we will have different nations. Sometimes kids come to me saying, hey, what language will you speak in heaven? And I say, your language. Because here we say, people from every nation, from all tribes and people and language and peoples and languages. There is Farsi in heaven. There is Portuguese. There is French. There is English, right? All these languages. Because there is diversity. This is the gospel. So we should learn these 4 principles. Do you remember the principles? Can we repeat the principles? Number 1, the principles to make disciples of all nations. Number 1, outward movement. Outward movement. Number 2, exile mindset. Number 3, sacralization of the secular. And number 4, hospitality. I think that if we exercise this, we'll be the privilege. We will be successful in reaching the nations, starting in our neighborhood, in our church, in our context, but with a global mind, right? Mindset.